My name is Vivian Blake, and this is what happened. I've always known how to stay quiet. It's a skill you pick up early when you grow up with someone who demands the spotlight and punishes you for stepping into it. My mother ruled the house, like a holiday planner with a grudge. Nothing ever went as planned, yet somehow everything was always your fault. That Christmas, I gave my father a photo book. I'd spent hours piecing it together, old Polaroids, faded prints, even a receipt. From the first car he bought when I was 5. He smiled when he opened it, real and soft. But before he could say much, my mother spoke. "Well," she said, wine glass halfway to her mouth, "trust Vivian to turn Christmas into a funeral." The room froze. My brother snorted into his plate. Dad blinked, and I just sat there, holding a ribbon in one hand and silence in the other. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me shifted. A slow, metallic click. I'd kept my mouth shut through the jabs, the inheritance edits, the whispered errands she made Dad run behind her financial back. But this moment, this small bitter insult dressed as holiday banter, it was the final breadcrumb. I looked at her, not in anger, just observation. Like a chessboard you've studied for months and finally realize she's been playing the same opening move every time. The gift bag she gave me earlier still sat unopened. I knew it was something half-used, a scented candle from a sale bin. Last year, it was a spatula. The year before, socks that weren't even my size. Meanwhile, my brother was already posting photos of his new watch online. "Thanks, Mom," the caption read. She didn't see me. Not really. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Instead, I watched her refill her glass, still smug from the sting she thought had landed. I slid the envelope deeper into my bag, the one with printed bank records, time-stamped, transfers, and one signature that would start it all. I was done playing quiet. This was the year I would speak. Script. Section 2. The balance that never balanced. Exact word, count, 400. It started with a spreadsheet. A few weeks before Christmas, Dad had asked me to help organize his medical records. His memory wasn't what it used to be, not bad, just foggy. After the surgery, he'd become more passive with finances. My mother had taken over most of the account handling, which seemed efficient, until I opened the joint statements. The amounts weren't subtle. 4 separate transactions, each over $10,000, marked simply as consultation services. No vendor listed, just a line item and a signature block. I paused. Something about it felt off. The handwriting in the electronic signature field looked like hers, not his. I cross-referenced the dates. 2 of them occurred the same week Dad was hospitalized, still on an IV drip and struggling to recall basic things like the nurse's name. There was no way he'd been making high-level financial decisions that week. "Dad," I said carefully, "do you remember approving these?" He leaned forward, squinting. "What are they for?" "Consulting. That's all it says." He shook his head slowly. "I don't remember that. Your mother handles those now." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Detached. Disconnected. As if he'd handed over the wheel and no longer questioned where the car was going. I didn't confront her then. There was no point. She'd deny it, twist it, or call me paranoid. I'd played that game before, and lost every round. This time I started saving PDFs. I made duplicates, labeled folders with neutral names, December receipts, family admin, MISC, notes. That was the first thread. I didn't know where it led yet, but I knew better than to pull without preparation. The next morning, I requested itemized reports from the bank, under the pretext of clarifying Dad's deductible coverage. The woman on the line was kind. She didn't question my role. Maybe she heard the hesitation in my voice. Or maybe she'd seen too many daughters like me. Calm, controlled, and quietly furious. The truth rarely announces itself. It drips, slowly. One transaction, one timestamp. One broken signature at a time, and I had just taken the first drop. It was supposed to be a simple errand. Dad had asked me to find his old insurance paperwork, the original policy from the 80s back when premiums were still mailed in. The hallway filing cabinet hadn't been touched in years. Most of it was expired statements, faded envelopes, and outdated guidebooks on Medicare. Then I saw it, a yellow folder shoved behind a thick booklet on annuity options. It was unmarked, but the weight felt wrong. Heavy. Intentional. Inside were loose sheets, receipts, transaction slips, photocopies of checks with amounts I didn't recognize. And then, near the back, a stapled packet that immediately turned my stomach. Amendment to Blake Family Revocable Living Trust. I hadn't seen this before. I would have remembered. I sat down on the floor, skimming the clauses. The language was subtle but decisive. Full financial authority transferred to my mother. Medical power of attorney, too. And under beneficiary. Adjustments. My name was missing entirely. It was as if I had never existed. The date? 3 weeks after Dad's surgery, when he could barely hold a spoon. The signature looked like his, but the lines were shaky, uneven. There was no witness. Signature. Just a notary stamp from a town 40 minutes away. I stared at the page, trying to feel something. Rage, grief, betrayal. But all I felt was cold, precision-level cold, like a balance sheet stripped of emotion. I took a photo with my phone. Then another. I uploaded them to a private cloud folder. Then I placed the packet back exactly where I found it. There was no confrontation. No storming into the living room. I wasn't going to give her the theater she fed on, but I made a decision right there, kneeling on that dusty carpet, surrounded by false security. She had tried to erase me on paper. I would answer on paper too. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone, not yet, but I needed context. Dad's former accountant, Richard Haynes, had retired last spring. Still, I found his number in an old binder labeled Legal and Financial, tucked away in the den. I called under the guise of estate clarification, something about aligning Dad's current records with past filings. He picked up after 3 rings. Vivian, was it? Of course I remember your family, he said, his voice warm but careful. Accountants don't forget families like mine. They remember the quiet ones. When I mentioned a trust amendment filed, post-surgery, there was a pause. A short breath like a man weighing ethics against convenience. Ah. Yes. I recall there was a sudden request to update the document, he said finally. Time sensitive, they said. Your mother handled it all. I was told your father had approved. Though if I'm honest, he didn't speak much during our last call. Because he was still recovering? I asked. Exactly. He was groggy, disoriented, not someone I'd normally certify decisions with. And you processed it anyway? He hesitated. Then quietly, I did what I was told. She insisted it was urgent. Those 6 words stuck like pins. She insisted it was urgent. That urgency had erased my name, transferred control, created a financial cage my father didn't even know he was in. Richard offered to send me the cover letter she'd provided at the time, said he still had it archived. I thanked him, said I'd follow up. When I ended the call, I sat in the hallway and stared at the floorboards. The wood still had the same scratch marks from when I used to slide around in socks as a kid. Back then, we played pretend. Now someone else was pretending to be my father, on paper. She'd moved faster than his healing, and Richard had helped. Among the flagged entries, one stood out for how harmless it looked, $1,700 to a church donation fund. The memo line read, Restoration Campaign, St. Luke's Parish. It was the kind of expense no one questions. Who scrutinizes charity? But something about the date felt staged. It fell right between 2 hospital invoices. That week, my father couldn't keep food down, let alone coordinate 5-figure donations. I searched for the church online. St. Luke's had closed 3 years ago. The building had been sold to a real estate developer. No restoration, no campaign. Still, I called. The old office number listed in the registry. A soft-spoken woman picked up. We haven't accepted funds since the closure, she said. We made an announcement to all past members back then. I'm surprised anyone would still be donating. I thanked her and hung up. Then I looked again at the routing number in the transfer line. It didn't belong to a non-profit. The account was listed under H. Coulson Enterprises, Coulson being my mother's maiden name. It wasn't a donation. It was a redirection, a quiet laundering through faith and fiction. I logged the discovery like evidence, screenshot, PDF, voice memo. One more piece in a growing ledger. And for a brief second, I pictured her typing in the memo herself, restoration, campaign, and smiling, not because it was believable, but because it was untouchable, because she assumed no one would bother confirming the existence of a church, or the details on a bank slip. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. She didn't just erase my name, she rerouted trust. Quite literally. And all it took was a closed chapel and a name that didn't belong to her anymore. It wasn't divine. It was deliberate. Christmas Day always felt like a production. My mother wasn't just the hostess, she was the director. Everything choreographed, the roast carved with theatrical grace, the table settings ironed like uniforms, and the conversation stitched together with passive jabs dressed as jokes. She handed out the gifts last, her favorite part of the performance. My brother's box was wrapped in heavy silver paper. He peeled it open and grinned. A new watch. Sleek, modern, expensive. "Thanks, Mom," he said, lifting it for a photo. "Looks like it cost more than rent." Then she turned to me, passed over a soft paper bag that smelled faintly of wax. Inside was a used candle. Half melted, label faded. I didn't flinch. "Maybe next year, Vivian," she said, tilting her head in that way she always did when cruelty came sugar-coated, when things turn around for you. Dad didn't say anything. He hadn't all morning. Just sat quietly, watching like someone sitting through a play he'd already seen too many times. That's when I reached into my bag, not for my phone, not for a clever comeback, but for the envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a clip. Inside, copies of everything. The forged amendment, the bank transfers, the routing numbers, a short memo summarizing the timeline and questions she couldn't spin away. I didn't place it on the table. Not yet, but my hand lingered on it while she poured more wine, still smirking at her own lines. She thought she'd written the script, that I was still playing the understudy. But this time, I wasn't here to read her lines. I glanced at my father, then back at the gift bag beside me. Waxy, reused, and meaningless. Symbolic, really, because that's what I had been to her all these years. A placeholder, a daughter on paper, someone to dismiss with thrift store affection. Except now, I held something real, and for once, she wouldn't see the next act coming. There's a silence that hits just before a lie collapses. Heavy, static, anticipatory. I let that silence settle over the table as I stood up and calmly reached into my bag. The envelope made a soft sound against the cloth. Nothing dramatic. No yelling, no accusations, just paper. "I'd like to share a few numbers," I said, eyes steady on my mother. Her hand, mid-reach toward the wine glass, paused. "Excuse me?" she asked, voice airy. "Just a few lines," I said. "Dates, amounts, and where they went." I unfolded the first sheet and began to read. May 14th, $11,300 to Coulson Enterprises. May 20th, $8,750 to the same. June 3rd, $17,200, labeled as a church restoration campaign. The church no longer exists. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look away. Dad shifted in his seat. "What's going on?" I walked over, placed the packet in front of him. I had some questions about a few transactions. While I was helping, "You with the insurance records?" He flipped through it, slow at first, then stopped at the trust amendment. This isn't right." "No," I said. "It's not." My mother's lips parted like she wanted to laugh but didn't know if it would land. Her face twitched, just once, but enough. I turned back to the table and kept going. June 14th, $9,600 to an unregistered account. July 2nd, $13,400. All withdrawals signed by you, Dad, while you were sedated post-surgery. I let the implication breathe. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. My brother looked between us, unsure whether to speak. But she didn't deny it. Not yet. She just sat there, gripping the armrest of her chair like it might hold the lie in place. It, totals just under $82,000, I said. Across 9 transactions. None discussed. All hidden. Dad looked stunned, but not angry. Just distant, like someone remembering a place they hadn't realized they'd left. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a reading. A financial obituary. Written in numbers. Signed in silence. Dad held the papers in his hands longer than I expected. His eyes moved slowly across the page, lips slightly parted. I could see him trying to piece together a memory that didn't exist. This is my signature, he murmured, almost like a question. I leaned in and laid down a second sheet beside it, another signature from earlier that year. One I'd pulled from a notarized document he signed before the surgery. Clean lines. Steady pressure. Confident strokes. Now compare, I said, pointing to the amendment. This one's dated the week you came home from the hospital. He frowned. Looked again. And I watched the recognition settle. Not the memory, but the logic. The timeline didn't match the man. He was still on pain meds when this was signed. Still asking me where his slippers were. Still waking up disoriented at 2 a.m., asking if it was morning. I don't remember signing this. I stayed quiet. Across the table, my mother tilted her head, performing confusion. Of course you signed it, George, she said, too light, too casual. You just don't remember because it was such a blur. Everything was chaotic back then, but... Her voice trembled on that last word. Dad didn't look at her. He just stared at the page. Not angry, just hollow. Like the bottom had dropped out of something he assumed was solid. This is my signature, he repeated. But it doesn't feel like mine. He ran his thumb over the paper, as if trying to feel the truth in the ink, then looked at me, eyes searching. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That's when it happened. The shift. The moment loyalty broke under the weight of proof. Not a shout, not a demand, just stillness. And in that stillness, he saw it. The fraud in the ink, the betrayal hiding behind domestic routine. He didn't accuse her, he didn't argue, he just folded the paper once slowly and held it in his hand like a verdict. Not for court, for clarity. The room didn't explode. It hollowed. My mother leaned back in her chair, laughing, one of those brittle, performative sounds she used when the air got too real. Vivian, sweetheart, she said, placing a hand lightly on her chest. You always had a wild imagination. You've misunderstood everything. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were hard, calculating. She was buying time, trying to rewrite the scene before it settled into memory. My brother cleared his throat. Is this another one of your things? He asked, not even looking at the documents Dad now held in both hands. You always twist stuff. You get like this. I didn't answer him. He wasn't part of the equation anymore. Dad hadn't moved. He just stared at the amendment, his jaw slack, hands still. I watched the shift in him, not panic, not anger, just a quiet subtraction. A quiet realization of how long he'd been managed. Then wordlessly, he stood. He folded the papers once like he had in the kitchen earlier and tucked them under his arm. His chair scraped softly as he backed away from the table. My mother's expression faltered, a flicker of disbelief across her carefully maintained poise. George, she said, still smiling, you're not seriously... He didn't respond. He walked out of the room with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who wasn't confused, just done. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. It settled over everything like ash. Her smile didn't break, but it didn't reach her eyes. It just hung there, frozen, useless. Like a storefront light still on after closing time, she'd lost control of the narrative, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the one unraveling. I felt like the one holding the thread. It came a week later, mid-morning, just as I was finishing a quiet cup of coffee. A number I didn't recognize lit up my phone. The kind of number that usually signals spam or solicitor calls. But something told me to answer. Vivian Blake? The voice asked, measured and professional. Yes. This is Alan Denning. I'm your father's estate attorney. He asked me to contact you directly. I stood up without realizing. My fingers tightened around the mug. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Blake has requested a full review of the family trust and all related financial records. He's asked for an independent audit of any amendments processed in the last 18 months. I stayed silent. He also requested your name be reinstated as a beneficiary, the lawyer continued, retroactively, with all entitlements restored. Pause. Paper shuffled faintly on his end. Then, he said you were the only one looking out for him. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No swelling music. Just a sentence stated plainly, like a fact pulled from a file. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I just stood there, staring out the window. Cars passed. The world didn't stop. But something inside me did. Uncoiled, settled. A pressure. I didn't even realize I'd been carrying slid off. This wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about truth. Quiet, inconvenient, and stubborn. The kind of truth that doesn't knock down doors but opens drawers, cross-checks dates, reads fine print. For years I'd been told to let things go, to not rock the boat, to keep the peace while others stirred chaos beneath the surface. And yet here I was, the one holding a call like this. He had seen it. Finally. Not just the numbers, but the betrayal beneath them. And he'd chosen to act. Not with outrage, but with a signature. She had taken my name off paper. He was putting it back, and that felt like justice, signed in ink, not screamed in rage. Midnight came and went without a call. There was no Happy New Year text. No message from my mother pretending things could be glued back together. Brother didn't reach out either. I wasn't surprised. Silence had always been their weapon, and now, their retreat. I spent the evening alone. No champagne, no noise, just soft music humming from the next apartment and a cup of chamomile tea. Going cold on the windowsill. The envelope arrived 2 days earlier, hand-delivered, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting on the front immediately. My father's, steady, deliberate, the way he always labeled tools in the garage. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No legal documents, no corrections to the trust, just a handwritten note. Thank you for protecting me, for seeing what I couldn't. I should have asked questions. I'm sorry it took me this long. That was it. No flourish, no excuses. Just an acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't need length to carry weight. I folded the note twice, carefully, and placed it in the old photo album I had given him. The one she said ruined Christmas. Now it held the one gift I hadn't expected, his clarity. She had taken money. Years of it. Redirected and buried it under the language of love and responsibility. But that night I realized something deeper. She had also tried to steal the story. The version of who I was. The narrative that made me disposable. But I had taken it back. Not with confrontation. Not with spectacle. Just facts, timelines, ink, and a truth that had finally been spoken, if only between two people. That New Year's Eve didn't begin with her. It began with me and the quiet return of everything she'd tried to erase. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no final, dramatic goodbye, just paperwork. My mother still tells people I overreacted, that I made a scene over nothing, that I read too much into numbers, twisted intentions, tried to punish her for being the responsible one. That's her script now. A cleaner one. One that paints me as volatile and ungrateful because it's easier to label someone irrational than face the line items they uncovered. But quietly, the story changed. The lawyer's name is now saved. In her phone, under private advisor. The same lawyer who reinstated my name into the trust, the one she once swore was already settled. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I didn't even tell her I knew, but I did. The revised documents were sent to me last month, neutral envelope, no frills. Inside, my name restored, no red ink, no explanation. Just there, as if it had never been missing. It was never about revenge. Not really. Not the kind that roars, not the kind that breaks dishes or burns bridges. My anger didn't need volume, it needed structure, because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves like water, quiet, persistent, reshaping what it touches. Sometimes it comes in the form of statements balanced, trust amendments corrected, and the sound of a phone not ringing from people who once controlled every conversation. There's a calm that comes after being underestimated for too long. A steadiness. I didn't win by shouting louder. I won because I paid attention, because I didn't let gaslighting rewrite the ledger of what I knew. She still smiles at church functions, still hosts holidays without me, still pretends nothing's changed. But I know the numbers. I know the signatures. I know the paper trail that turned a daughter's silence into a reckoning. My name is back. The truth is documented, and the final chapter didn't need applause, just a signature.